Hey there, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Today's podcast is going to be a short one. It's a very specific one. We ran into a few Android build errors earlier today. It took a little bit of digging and trying out different solutions to go past those issues and get the app working essentially. So I figured it'll help you if you're running into the same errors, and it likely has to do with the newer versions and incompatibility between a number of different versions essentially. That's in the problem in a nutshell. But that said, let me do a screen share and walk you through some of those issues, and at least that way, if you run into this issue, or if you know someone else who does, it'll save you hopefully a number of hours that it actually took us to get to the bottom of this issue. So let me share my. Okay, let me actually share my entire desktop because there's going to be a bunch of things that I'm going to have to share here. Okay. You probably the app is probably not running at this time, or maybe let's see. Okay, so that's the app. If you haven't checked, downloaded our app, I highly recommend that you go to the App Store or Play Store and do it. This issue was specifically Android related. So what we're going to look at is essentially what we had done to get things working on Android. So let me actually get out of these pages here. I'm going to go to. Yeah, let me explain, let me show you what the error was just to get started. So there's a few different errors essentially, and this is what happened. We're trying to do a build, trying to get the app running on the Android simulator on OS X on our Mac, and it just didn't work. And so you're like, okay, what is going on? And it was not feature related, not related to anything we had done in the recent past or what we are currently working on. So it was almost like, and we didn't even do a Flutter upgrade. We are on the latest version of Flutter, so it was not related to a Flutter upgrade. And I say that because 9 times out of 10, we do a Flutter upgrade and we end up running into some issue. That's typically nothing to do with us or our app in particular, but it's third-party issues that we almost always run into. Today, that was not the case, thankfully, or maybe not, depending on how you look at it, because we've run into that so many times with Flutter upgrades. We have some sense of what it might take to fixing it. This one was a new issue. So what you see here is there were a number of different error messages. I think I just captured a couple of them to share it with you here. So shared preferences is one of the, let me go to pub.dev and let me search for shared preferences. Okay, so this is one of the packages or plugins that we do use, shared preference. Now we're not going to the details. We're not going to go into the details of this package because that's not related to the problem. That's not directly at least. So here you see an error. It says execution failed for task, and this error happened when we actually did a Flutter run and picked the Android simulator, either from the command line or through the Android Studio IDE. It says execution failed for this particular task. It says shared preferences underscore Android, meaning it's for the Android build. Could not resolve all files for this configuration. Blah blah blah. Android GDK image, and if you look at this carefully here, it says error while executing process, OpenJDK JLink with arguments, and you can read the rest of that stuff there. If you Google for this, and as you probably should or will, you're going to find a fair number of hits. I think we saw 2 or 3. Unfortunately, they're not related to our problem. And I've said this before in the previous podcast. People post problems and solutions in good faith, and we do that all the time as well. But you run into an issue and you try to solve the problem and you come up with a solution and you post that as a solution. And while that is the truth, as far as you're concerned and your problem is concerned, it may not manifest itself in the exact same manner to somebody else because there's a lot of other dependencies that they have, which are quite different from yours. So this is my experience generally with Stack Overflow and other tools, which is great. We need the community to help us and for us to help the community, but just take that with a grain of salt because sometimes you could go down the rabbit hole and spend numerous hours looking at these solutions offered on these different forums, and you then realize many years down the road that actually it doesn't have anything to do with you, or it does not solve your problem. I mean, just that's just my 2 cents. That's one way the problem surfaced itself, and then we made some changes, and I'll talk through some of those changes. it changed to a different error, which is it says Java compiler version 23 has deprecated support, blah blah blah, and what Kotlin does not yet support 23 GDK target, falling back to 22. So what this means is there's incompatibility between the versions, and the problem here is we use a number of third-party plugins from pub.dev, just like everybody else. Your app has your code, and it has a lot of other things that you depend on. Like for instance, for Google sign in, we use this package, Google sign in, and we have Facebook and mm, the Facebook sign in, Apple sign in, and all the four essentially, right? Microsoft as well. So we use different plugins for them, and similarly we use plugins and packages for a number of different things. Now you don't have control over those packages. It's open source, but again, short of making those changes of forking the repo and adding the fix or submitting pull requests, debugging the issue and submitting pull requests, which you can do sometimes and not all the time because you have other fish to fry. You are kind of at the mercy of those plugins. So you want to be careful in which ones you pick. You pick the ones that have enough support, popularity, and so on and so forth. Yet some of them, this one's all right. It's the last they published date was like 10 months ago. There could be others which actually don't even are not even supported anymore. So you're in a dicey situation. You need a plan to sort of swap those out with something else that's comparable, and also not also maintain the functionality, so your users don't lose any functionality. Okay, so that's essentially the some part of the problem. So what we had to do to fix this, we tried a number of different things, but here's what it came down to. The packages that we were using, they had different, there were compatibility issues. And let me go pick one of them here, right? So let me go to, I don't know, what was it? Said device info was one of them. Yep, if I go to device info, or let me actually pick probably even shared preferences, because that's what we were talking about. Now you see here, in shared preferences, the build.gradle file, the Kotlin JVM target is 1.8, and the compile options, it says source and target is version 1.8. Now if you go here, you see that 1.8 is pretty old, very old. And shared preferences, let's go back here. Yep, so this was published quite recently, right? And the previous version before that was 2 months ago. So they've had some reasonably frequent updates. Yet, when you go here to back to where was I? Shared preferences. Open this. The version is 1.8. And what happened was in the error that I'm showing you here, this is actually a slightly different error, but there's a version of this error, something like this, but slightly different. What it tried to tell what it's essentially meant was that this version is incompatible with the rest of the dependencies we have defined in our build.gradle file. Now we keep updating it, so we are, I think, on almost the latest version, if not the latest. I believe it was like 20, and now we are on 23, which is the latest version. Um, and then the JVM target too, right? So we keep up to date, but that rest of the plugins do not. And now when you have a number of plugins and dependencies where they have different version requirements, and yours is the higher version, in this case it was, but there could be a case where it's quite the opposite, where you're the lower version, the dependency is on a higher version. You're going to run into I want to say bizarre, but understandable, but yet rather annoying dependency issues, and you feel like, hey, do I have any control over it? Now, not really, because you cannot go and change this. These are files, you see the path here, it's pub cache hosted, it's in the home directory, right? It's basically generated, so to speak. So it's created when you actually do the build. So you cannot really touch it. And even if you touch it, it's going to work for you locally, but not actually when you publish it to the Play Store. So you have to come up with a different alternative. So what we have done here essentially is this. We found some direction and help. So if you go to the build.gradle file, let me actually do a git show dev. Actually, let me do a show history. I want to do a show history for selection so we don't see everything else that was changed. Yeah, so the previous version was pretty simple. It said projects and build directory. Now, one minor change here is, we use layout.build directory because build directory is deprecated. And if you go to build directory, like say, for instance, if I actually type uh, root project dot build directory, if I go there, you see, it says deprecated. It says use get layout.get build directory. Unfortunately, that didn't work. It actually pulled up the wrong directory. So what we had to do is we had to use a dot build directory dot get. And if you don't do this get, you're going to get a slightly you're going to get an array of directories, and you're going to get a and it's going to concatenate those items or elements in that array to drop to create your APK in, and it doesn't find the APK. And the other error we ran into because of that problem was it said it could not find the APK when we did the Flutter build APK. So different problem related to this regardless. So just watch out for it. If you want to get out of the deprecated call, which we try to do as much as possible, because if you let it slide, it becomes a tech debt. It'll take forever to resolve, and at one point it may not. It could be a breaking change or something where things don't work anymore. So sooner you do it, the better off you are. So the dot get fixes the problem. It took us a little bit of time to get to the bottom of that. And then this other solution, I can include a link to where we found part of this solution, which I think, we had to make a few different changes to get to the bottom of this problem, but this is one part of it. So it's important to note here. So the sub projects, as we saw the diff, we just had a single line here. I'm going to close this. Everything under after evaluate, we've added this. So what it's actually trying to do, it's basically saying for all the sub projects, your dependencies, you want to override them with these versions. So you're saying, hey, use Java version like 20, for source and target under compile options. And then the Kotlin and then the Android API version, we are saying use 34. So we've overridden that. So it doesn't matter what version the plugins happen to have, it'll override this. Now, uh, this is a fix that's going to be good for a fair bit, but again, as those versions, as they upgrade their versions, and it's either at version 20 or above for all of the plugins and dependencies we have, we might just get rid of this piece of code or keep this code and keep bumping up this version. That way, doesn't matter. It's hard to go to like 50 different dependencies and figure out which versions they are on and see if they're on the latest version that you're on or not. This is a safer option. And there's a couple of print statements here, so you know what's going on when you actually run this. So after we did that, let's say we run this, it's going to spit out. Let me see. Yep, you're going to see messages like this. Going to say setting, compile, blah blah blah. Java version of this package, Flutter Facebook auth to 20, setting compile SDK and SDK target SDK version 34. So we have the package name and the version number that's basically coming from here, these two print statements. So we did that. So that's a change we had to make. On top of that, we had to make a few other changes. Let me see. Yep, we go to settings.gradle under your Android directory. We did not, we also updated the versions of these like Kotlin Android. We had, it was a 2.0.0, we made it 2.0.20. The Android application was like previous 7 dot something, we made it 8.7.0. But this line was not there. The com Android library was not there. It seems like an innocuous line, but short of that, there were like 3 other errors which were unrelated to what I was showing, but still part of this problem. Now, the problem with solving these error, debugging, as we all know as developers, is you fix one, you see a different error, and then you make another change, you see a third error. Now, the third error could be a reflection of the change you made just most recently to fix the second problem, or it could be a reflection or a repercussion of the fix you made to problem number 1, which for some reason is incompatible with problem number 2, or the other problems you're yet to resolve. So at any point of time, I highly recommend that you make one change, see what happens across the board, then make the next change, then try the third one and do combinations, permutations. If you're not exactly sure about what it is that you're doing, or you're not sure what will fix the problem. Sometimes, and today was one of those days, we wouldn't have thought that not having this line, the ID Android library, and setting it to a version would have caused a problem. Now I forget what the problem was, but there was a slight, completely different Gradle error that had to be resolved by adding this line. Now, how did we find this? I don't know. It is probably a lot of searching, looking at other, issues that folks have reported on different plugins and packages, and a number of different things lead you to, okay, you know what, I need to look for something like this. And then I believe we stumbled into the Google documentation to find this particular line. Now, someone to call out for it, saying, hey, you know what, add this and your problems are going to be solved and life is going to be hunky dory. Not really. You're going to have to try a number of different things, like I said earlier, and this is one of the things we tried. So the combination of that change, this fix I'm showing you here, and a couple of things, earlier fixes I mentioned to you, collectively helped us resolve the problem. Now, before I end this podcast, is a few things we did. So, oops, not Gradle. So we had to do a brew install Gradle on the terminal, because typically we do all of the Gradle work on the Android IDE. Like you see this open, right? So we go to Android Studio and pretty much work off of here. But today, anyway, so we decided to install Gradle, and then Gradle, or whatever the right way to pronounce that is, Gradle W. Let me call it that. These are the two commands: Gradle W clean, assemble, debug, and assemble release. Once you do that, your APK is going to be generated. Now, again, you want to run this to see if things are fine, just like you would run Flutter Doctor to see if the basics of, after you do a Flutter upgrade, if things are all right. You want to do this because if short of this, it'll report an error. Like if you go to Xcode, it report an error. If you went to Android Studio, it reported an error, a bunch of different errors. But it never pointed to the package. It made it very, very difficult because you couldn't tell which package is the problem. The reason I'm able to pull up these exceptions here this way with shared preferences is simply because we ran Gradle W like this, from the from the Android directory. So we could tell which packages failed and what the particular errors were with those packages. Now, again, the first package that fails, it's going to report the error, and you're going to have to resolve that before you get to the next package. It's not like you're going to see a list of packages that fail with all of those errors. I don't think so. If memory serves me right, it's one after the other. It stumbles into the first package, it's problematic, shows you the error, you got to fix it, find a solution, and then keep going, chugging along, and then you go to the next packages, and so on and so forth. So it generated the APK, which was a great, big first or the second step in getting to this closer to the solution. But because of this directory, because of us not using the .get, what happened was it was creating a different directory, because that, remember I mentioned to you, there's an array of elements, and it concatenated all those paths and dropped the APK into that directory, which is a bizarre long name directory which didn't make any sense. So it was not, the APK was not found. So when we did the Flutter run and tried to deploy it to our Android simulator or the device, it just didn't work. So that ended up being the problem, because the APK was generated after we resolved the issues, but it was in the wrong directory. So that again is one of the changes we had to make. So after this, the problem was resolved. But again, I figured it was worthwhile capturing this in a podcast, because uh, it's not easy to, sometimes it's not easy to tell how to solve these problems. And 3 hours before, 4 hours, or however long it took us, we were like, okay, are we going to be able to get to the bottom of this problem at all? At least, is it going to be today, or is it going to be tomorrow, or maybe down the road? But thankfully and luckily, we were able to get the bottom of this issue. And I figured sharing this with you here in the 15-20 minutes is hopefully going to save you a ton of time, assuming you run into this issue and you stumble into this podcast as well. Huh? We hope you do. Check out our other podcasts, by going to, let me actually do that, show you screen before I end this podcast. Yep, you can check out our other podcasts by going to products.snowball.com and hitting podcast, and then you see a number of these collaborative podcasts and the solo podcasts as well, and they are on Spotify, Apple, and almost every other place that you can think of. So with that, I'm going to end this podcast. Hope this helps you. Thanks.